just have a different feel for generative AI. I just think there's a broader opportunity. It just needs to go through the paces of both maturation and comfort of adoption. And I think those things are going to happen more rapidly in this world than they have in the past decades.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Accolite Podcast, where we feature industry leaders who share their distinctive experiences that shaped their careers, the lessons they learned along the way, and their perspectives on the latest technology trends, leadership, and strategy. I'm your host, Manoj Jazra, and I lead global marketing strategy at Accolite. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Mark Berthiaume, an executive leader in the insurance and technology sectors. He has over 30 years experience in the property, casualty, insurance, and technology industries. Through his roles as a board member, advisor, and former tech innovation executive, Mark has brought his unparalleled proficiency to companies like OWIT Global, TechCanary, and MyCOI. His extensive background spans across both large cap and mid cap insurance providers, including the Hanover Insurance Group, Chubb Insurance, and Royal and SunAlliance Insurance Groups. In this episode, we'll uncover insights into Mark's unique path as an industry leader, the challenges he's overcome, and the wisdom he's acquired along the way. A warm welcome to you, Mark, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
So let's get started, Mark. You 30 years experience, obviously a ton of time in the industry, especially across insurance and technology. Can you give us a bit of background and share some of the highlights across your career?
Yeah, maybe just a couple of seconds on getting into this career, because it wasn't straightforward for me. I was a business administration major in university and was pretty much targeted towards management training programs and some other things as I was looking for, work in the end of my education career. And I had taken a couple of IT courses just as electives at my university and really enjoyed programming. And there was a systems analysis and design. And as I started looking for work, I started looking at both management training opportunities as well as programmer trainee. And so this is 1978, at a most fortuitous time for me to get involved in tech. And so I ended up, after going through some interviews, I ended up as a programmer trainee at Travelers Insurance Company in downtown Hartford. And my IT career took off from there. I wasn't exactly sure it would be the career for me, but it was a great move at a great time. In the late 70s was awesome time to be in tech, and lots of companies were looking for, for help and programmers. So I stayed with Travelers for a couple of years, and then I got into consulting. Got recruited by a consulting company not far from Travelers' home office, and did a few stints, a couple of projects, did a major body of work around point of sale. And one of the most interesting things that I did, I worked for a client of the consulting company, and then we brought me in-house to develop our own platform for sale in the marketplace. One of the more extraordinary experiences I had during my career. But after that, I ended up really focused almost entirely on insurance. I went to Monarch Life Insurance in my hometown of Springfield, Mass. Thought I would stay there for the rest of my career. Unfortunately, Monarch was taken into receivership. So they invested in some real estate that, brought their valuation down. And so Monarch, where again, I thought I would stay for quite some time, ended up in a closed book of business. I next went to Connecticut Mutual, and that was acquired by Mass Mutual. I left there to go to Orion Capital, and that was acquired by Royal and SunAlliance. So I had a bit of a challenge following me with, those three companies, one receivership, two acquisitions. I ended up in fine shape, but, it was pretty stressful going through those kinds of things at the time. My last two jobs, starting in 2001, were just great jobs, great companies. 2001, I started with Chubb. I was a divisional CIO at this point, but I ended up staying there 14 years. I ended up with field operations. So I ended up expanding my IT, experience into some business experience. I also had compliance, and in a very kind of odd way, I had information security. I wasn't the group CIO, I was a divisional CIO, but they put information security underneath me and had a great run there, 14 years until I was recruited in 2014 to join Hanover Insurance as their chief admin officer. So this was quite an interesting position for me because it had much more than IT. It had IT and, but real estate and facilities and, sourcing, vendor management, tax, and just a number of other non-IT areas. And I've always considered myself, a business person, equal or more than just being an IT person. So I found it quite interesting. I took that job. It was a great, great move. I ended my career there and along the way built out and replaced most of their systems. I was a co-sponsor for their inclusion and diversity area. And because of my oversight of both IT and real estate, I ended up running the COVID response group for the organization, sending people home and closing up our facilities and then planning for the return of people through the cleanup of the physical plant and having all the processes and procedures in place. So it was a great, great career, enjoyed it immensely. I retired in April of 21 and have been doing some board and advisory work, but not a lot, just enough to kind of keep me involved. Really love, I've got a big family, 9 grandkids, 5 kids, and my wife and I are pretty busy with all that.
Amazing. And I'm not sure if you ever kind of, when you reflect back, like over the last 30 years, and you're talking about in the late 70s as you got into finishing school and got into your first role, how big insurance would have been as a part of your career and your part of your life. Like, who would have thought, right? As you look back.
I want to be very honest here. I went on an interview during this process with an insurance company and had really no exposure to insurance. And I vividly remember the interview because I bombed. It was all about underwriting factors and how would I consider the underwriting worthiness of a building and some other assets. And I did terrible. I did not get a call back for another interview. Ended up in the insurance field through the IT side of things and made almost an entire 40-something year career out of that. I was with insurance for all but the time that I was consulting, which was just a handful of years. So insurance has been an interesting ride for me.
Super cool. I'm sure, like, as you reflect back, you were a leader of both business and technology at times in your career. Can you share like a specific example or set of examples where your insights and your strategy really contributed to a really successful part of an organization's success? Like, there must have been a couple or many cool projects within that you thought were really awesome.
Well, yeah, there's actually a few things that I can think of. I'll try to do this really quickly and just to manage time. But I mentioned the point of sale when I was going through my background. That was with a company called Comtech, and we actually built the point of sale capability for Friendly Ice Cream out of Wilbraham, Massachusetts. And at the time, this was all new tech, and I had to learn it, and I had to learn how the cash registers operate because we were integrating a mainframe computer with an array of cash registers, which were really just PCs, mini computers, in all these friendly ice cream shops in the area, and they were quite a few. So I spent probably a couple of years there building out capability, learning everything about the insides and the operation of these cash registers, building systems to handle recipes and inventory management, and then every night polling all of those mini computer cash registers, downloading prices and new recipes, and uploading sales figures and other statistics. And it was fascinating. And to this day, I mean, that was so early in my career. It is one of the coolest things that I did. It was stressful and a lot of sleepless nights, and had me really questioning whether I could do it. But I did, and we were successful there. And then the consulting president that I work for, is a small company, said, "I want you to come inside the company and build the same thing, except not on a mainframe, on a digital equipment mid-range mini." At the time. So this is in the 80s. So this is quite some time ago. But so I went from, doing that point of sale system to one that we actually marketed for sale. And I built it. I wrote most of it. I designed all of it. I did the sales calls with the president. I went on support calls when we were, so essentially a restaurant owner could use this to talk to all his cash registers, and been able to do everything they needed to do with recipes and information. And so we built the whole infrastructure in a home office with, many digital equipment corp, many computers, and all the systems to support it. It was just incredibly fascinating thing, because I was involved with every aspect of it. And so I always, when people ask me about, really interesting things, I have to talk about that, because it was probably the thing I got juiced up about the most in my entire career. But I did a lot of very interesting things. I actually started up the innovation organization along with Dick Levy at Hanover. So Dick is the president of personal and commercial, and he and I spun up the innovation organization to, at a time when some companies everyone was going after ways of innovating. And we built kind of an interesting model and staffed it in a way that, it really helped the business. It's still up and running. I also, on my own, built up or envisioned the digital organization. We had pockets of digital work going on around, Hanover. And so this was something I sold to the executive team, and essentially put it in place, hired for it. It's still, up and running. Those two things, I was pretty proud of the work, because they were not your normal drift, and took some real guts to kind of go after what it was, how to make it work, and most importantly, how to make it work inside how Hanover operates. And so that was a body of really good work. And my last thing was, I was a co-sponsor of inclusion, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this was something I just had gotten involved with, really saw it as an opportunity. And I partnered with Ann Tripp, who was our chief investment officer. We were co-sponsors for all the DEI subgroups, spun it up, went through education and training. And as I was leaving, we had 6 or 7 subgroups operating inside the program. And it was a great exposure, for people inside the company with others of like mind. But it was just a great thing for the company to have that kind of openness in hearing and seeing from people in these different areas of interest. So, when I think about the things that I did, those all come to mind.
That's really cool. And you know what I found most fascinating, and this is, I think, reflective of the industry you're in, obviously being a technologist and a leader across a variety of different areas, is that because you were in insurance and because you were in technology, you got to probably participate with a lot of different types of organizations. Now, you picked the ice cream example to begin with, but I'm sure that there were, because of insurance and its touches on every single sector and industry, you got to look at a variety of different ways to kind of conduct business, implement projects, and different types of stakeholders to work with.
Yes, absolutely. And it was just, and I look back at my career. I spent 43 years, and as I started as a programmer trainee, honestly wasn't sure I would make it to the next level. And I went through a lot of levels and got into leadership early, and did so many things, interesting things, met so many interesting people, and got so far outside of just IT. And I think that's a thing that really lit me up for my entire career. Was, I was a business major in university and expected to to be in the business field. And I ended up in IT, but was never truly just an IT guy. I coded for 6 years out of 43. And the rest of the time I was managing and leading, and midpoint of my career started branching into business, having business responsibility, and but always just enjoying something other than just the pure IT side.
Which is important because I'm kind of similar but different in that I have a computer science background. I coded for a bit, got into business right away, and now I lead marketing and have led marketing and digital teams, but my background's in computer science.
Right.
But to me, what I understand from your career, and I think built similar to you, is this the openness to continue to try different things to open different doors, because you don't know where they'll lead at the end of the day, right? And these new experiences are what kind of makes a career really fascinating.
I'll say this, it's fascinating, totally agree with you. Sometimes I wonder where my nose was leading me, because it was pretty stressful at times. There's no playbook. There's just no playbook for a lot of where I ended up, and the DEI stuff in particular, but just ending up running business, areas as an IT leader, having been exposed to them, now being responsible. I just seem to always be pushing for that kind of experience. And now that I'm retired, I'm super happy I did, because it just gives me so much satisfaction and perspective. But at the time, there were a lot of sleepless nights. But it was, I wouldn't trade any of what I did over those 43 years.
What was it that got you into the DEI program? You wouldn't think typically like it would come from technology area, but something caused you to get involved in. What was that specific thing that pushed you to get into the DEI space?
Well, I said this in front of a broad group, I think at Hanover at one time. I just started noticing the diversity that I saw when I was at the lower levels of the organization didn't seem to be following me as I moved to the upper parts of the organization. And I saw some people that I thought were disenfranchised that probably could have gone into bigger and better places, both, people of color or gender. And it just became noticeable to me. There was a time where, everyone that probably knows me thinks my career went from bottom to top in a heartbeat, but it didn't. I made it up to a certain level and kind of stayed there for a while. But I just noticed along my career trajectory that things were getting to be monochromatic. It was kind of all the same, both in kinds of people and in gender, et cetera. And so it just was something I noticed. And, so as I was making hiring decisions, probably as around the time I was with Orion Capital. So Orion Capital, Chubb, and Hanover were my three last companies. I was just, from that point, trying to find more diversity in any ways that I could. By the time I got to Hanover, it was in high drive, and I was going after trying to not create, a one-dimensional looking organization. And that pushed me to conversations with HR and to the president of the company. And next thing I know, I'm part of starting up some of the groups looking at it. We brought in an outside company to help us look at how to be, more open-minded and, in a number of different ways. And so it was just something that hit me during my career as I moved and saw that I was moving and others were not. And so I tried to do something about that in probably my last 10 years.
And it's so important that critical leaders like yourselves take the time to notice. Otherwise, how will change actually happen if no one at your levels made those types of changes? So good on you to take that on. As we kind of pivot, like obviously with so much experience in the sector and in insurance, like what are you seeing that's changing? Like obviously you retired a couple years back, but you've been in the space for so long. What were some major technology breakthroughs as you were making your way through your career that you thought were really changing the sector?
I've been at this for so long. I've seen just about everything, to be honest with you. When when I came out of university and I was a programmer trainee at Travelers, it was all mainframes and dumb terminals. And so I literally watched the advent of mini computers. And so that, the work that I did was on the point of sale was all Digital Equipment Corp, which is no longer around, but they're pretty big in the mid-range field. So I went from working on that to mid-range and ultimately to PCs. But that's, over the span of late 70s to mid to late 80s. And so, there was no internet, no cell phones, no, PCs until really near the end. And so I watched all of that and was working on all of that, creating organizations and systems and capabilities that morphed from, dumb terminal mainframe to mid-range to PCs, and then networking and distributing capability both inside the home office of, insurance companies, because that's really where I made my career as insurance companies, and then into field offices. So it was really riding the wave of distributed computing. And that kind of held for a while. I'd say probably the biggest move, after that was probably in the area of predictive modeling. And so I can remember doing probably some of the biggest work in predictive modeling when I was at Chubb. And, we were trying to create models for kind of the middle market and the specialty business. And there weren't a lot of people doing that. And so, that was an area that I think was leading. It certainly led inside of Chubb, and there were, as I can recall, a lot of people who questioned its viability back then because it was new and different and threatening in a lot of ways to traditional underwriting. But we did really good work in the specialty line using predictive modeling. Those were the things that kind of developed. Obviously, the internet comes through, cell phones come through, mobile apps come through at all this time. So I've seen it all. I've seen it from the beginning of nothing but iron mainframes and dumb terminals hanging off them to basically being able to do anything inside of an insurance company on a cell phone. And I've either managed it or built it myself over that time frame, and it's been quite a ride.
You basically have seen it all, right? As you talk about like terminals all the way to the advent of the internet. And I think my next question is a bit of a build off of the last one, which is, you and I have spoken a bit about this, is now you got AI and generative AI taking hold. Generative AI, some calling it potentially as important as the internet and mobile itself. How do you think that will have impact to when this can now start to automate and create content, create insights in a sector like insurance as we go forward?
So I've been following it pretty closely, even though a lot of this developed over the time I've retired. I'm still doing board work and other stuff, and I'm staying involved in the industry. And I think generative AI is a huge game changer. And I'll say that right up front, but I'll also say, as I've watched some of the evolution of the capabilities, right now it's not prime time for mission critical apps. There's been, just as I've watched it, just the versions that have come out have worked really well in some areas, and then as new versions come out, not so well. And so, but it's like any new technology. I mean, if you just look at the internet, and people talked about it being the big commerce, carrier of so much commerce in our economy. And back at the time, there were little things that broke it, and there were just ways where things didn't come through. But, as the years have piled on, it's a major, major, major force. So I actually see it as great potential, but it's a little bit of the Wild West. So, if I were sitting in my old seat looking at this, I would be trying to find the ways of adopting it in the ways where we could learn, make some sense, get some experience under our belt, know where it works, where it doesn't work, but not bet the ranch, in certain places. So insurance is a regulated business. And so it's conservative by nature, and we're careful. I grew up in this industry, not as an insurance executive, but working inside an insurance company and being an executive alongside all of those. If I were there, I'd be trying to find those places where we could cut our teeth on getting some experience under our belt, but ultimately looking at ways of how could this work with the core capabilities, underwriting, claims, places where it could really influence the business dramatically. And I believe it will. I think this is one of those techs, and I've watched a lot of things come and go, but I think this is one of those, bits of tech that it's gonna take hold because it just has enormous potential and impact. But I also tell you, it isn't just the technology that has to mature. There's a lot of leaders, both business and non-business, that would look at this as being extraordinarily risky and, may not be interested in it. I actually think there might be a need for not only more education, but more time for generations of leaders to change over. I've seen this happen throughout my 40 plus years, where tech that's a little pushy, if you will, and threatens either sensibilities or risk aversion can really get kind of dead-ended inside of companies and inside of some industries. And insurance could be one of those. So I think it could take some time for that to place through, but I think it has enormous potential. And I'd be trying to find ways to keep it up and running and learning from it if I were still in my seat.
I think this thing specifically is causing a lot of extra swirl. And you were talking about the Wild Wild West, and you talked about people and leaders not knowing where to start. And I think part of the reason is that we probably haven't seen so much change that's happened in such short period of time, where every day and every week something new pops up and you're like a bit of a squirrel moment where you're looking left and right to see if you're still relevant as the technology keeps changing.
It is. It's happening. It's happening super fast. The cycles are so much faster than, I go back and look at my career as I started as a programmer, worked all the way, always in the insurance industry. And as these things came out, there was always a cycle that you had to go through before you could really tell something was real. And I could just remember some generative languages back way back in the day when I was close to coding and, exploring those, and they went away. But those things took a long time for them to play through because just the adoption rate and the numbers of people and users these days, that adoption rate and testing is happening enormously quick. And, I've been watching some of the Gen AI and how it's working in one version, and 3 weeks later, it's 98% less capable in particular areas after, a change. And so I think we're going through a rapid flattening of that curve, that old curve they used to show you about adoption and maturity. I think that curve is flattening dramatically. And I do think as we're kind of moving our way through some of these technologies that they're going to be around and they will mature, but they're going to try the souls of men and women along the way, because I think there'll be some, difficult things in the business for those things to take charge of.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned this off the top as you were talking about generative AI, especially in the financial sector and specific insurance, like the regulations sometimes make you go slower. Are there any tips around when you're in such regulated spaces to go a bit faster in an innovative space? Because what I feel is happening, and this is to talk about some examples, when you look at like the banking sector, or even when you look at like telco and things like that, sometimes different, like now digital first carriers and digital first technology companies and financial companies are starting to show up. which means that they're able to do things a bit more innovatively versus like the players who've been in the game a lot longer. How does someone like a bigger player like a Chubb or a Hanover, how do they participate with some level of innovation and speed? But because these kind of new players are going to make some pretty large ground on this as well.
Well, it's a challenging question. I'm not sure I have a great answer, but I would say the places, if you want to cut your teeth on the capability, learn it, develop some competency, and let it mature all along the same timeline, would be to to start in areas that are less regulatory in their impact. So as you're pricing product, you're making underwriting decisions, as you're paying claims, those are areas that are more challenging to have some newer tech that could potentially fail or be inconsistent. So as I think about it, if I were sitting in the seat, I would want to try the capabilities in areas that are less oversight driven, marketing, training, even parts of component coding. I mean, this stuff can write code. And so, there's places I think where you can cut your teeth and get some experience in the organization, but at the same time, let some time and, external forces begin to help grease the skids a little bit for some of this. I think about this in the same way I thought about blockchain. And, you just don't see a whole lot with, blockchain, but I was on one of the early committees looking at blockchain capability for insurance, and it was through the institutes. And I was a member. We tried a whole bunch of different ways and places, and I still think it's a technology that can have an impact down the road, but it really hasn't found its home. But we tried our darndest along that way to kind of parallel our experience, see what we could do with it, and let it kind of mature in the process. And blockchain was moving pretty quick for a while, but we just never got there. And it just never hit the stride, and we really never did a whole lot with it. There's more happening in the 2.5 years since I've retired. I've been involved with some companies and talking through some interesting things that they're doing. But I think when I hear generative AI, I think a lot about blockchain and how we were interested and anxious to see what we could do with it. It didn't play out. I just have a different feel for generative AI. I just think there's a broader opportunity. It just needs to go through the paces of both maturation and comfort of adoption. And I think those things are going to happen more rapidly in this world than they have in the past decades.
I think you're probably right. We'll get you out of here on this one. So 30 to 40 years plus, obviously, in technology, leadership, insurance, and overall in your career. Every person, as they reflect back, they obviously have different paths throughout their career, and you ended up where you did, and you ended up in obviously a wonderful spot after 40 years into it. So what would you give if you were to look back and you want to give some advice to aspiring leaders? What would you say to them in terms of what to look out for, what strategies to take to have like an impressive career like yours?
Well, I think about two things when I think about this question, because I've been asked it. And I've actually, for my university, was up giving a talk to a group of graduating kids. And there's two things that really stick out for me as I think about how I traversed my career, because honestly, I did not think there were days I didn't think I'd get past the programmer analyst. It was just, the tech was hard. I was learning a new craft. I'm inside of a big corporation, and just so much to learn. But where I ended up making, my bed as I got through my career, first and foremost, was learning the business. So I think that sounds a little crazy to some who may be enamored with the tech. And for me, when I started my career, it was all tech. I had to learn how to code. I had to learn how to problem solve. But as you get further and further up that career ladder, knowing the business and knowing it really well affords you an opportunity to be an advocate for change as well as a steward of the technology. And there's so many people that only have one side of that equation. And it was the thing I was dead set on solving. At some point in my career, I ran into a business person who dismissed me as as an IT person and, not really part of the business. And that one, it stung, and I never forgot it, and just decided I'm going to learn this insurance business so well that I'll challenge the business leaders on their own business. And I did. I stayed in insurance. I became an insurance professional, not just an IT professional. And it absolutely helped me figure out ways of getting the best solutions for the company, whether they be automated or not automated. But I became a business leader first and an IT practitioner after that. That's the most important thing I would say. But secondly, I spent my entire career uncomfortable. And I forced myself into degrees of discomfort. It wasn't other people. Whenever I got to a particular part of a job or within a company or something, and I got bored or slowed down or just didn't feel like I was making the impact or growing, I had to go do something else. And so for my age, I don't know, I didn't count at one point I counted my career moves. I think it's 7 companies and 9 if you count the fact that 2 companies I was with were taken over by other companies. I was always wanting to learn more and to do more. And I just got very comfortable being uncomfortable. And, those 2 things to me are probably the biggest things I think about when I think about my career, learning the business and just finding a way to accept, the discomfort that goes with the challenges of doing IT in an ever-changing world.
And if you were to ask the average person, those 2 things, it's almost hard to do those very effectively, to make yourself uncomfortable, because people do like the comfort and being able to know that there's consistency in their day-to-day. And I love what you've said there in terms of discomfort, because to me, it's the challenge that keeps you growing and hungry as you kind of aspire in your long-term career as well. So I definitely appreciate those words of wisdom.
Thank you.
Well, that's the end of this episode. So thank you very much, Mark. I loved hearing your methodical and very thoughtful approach to technology, innovation, and leadership. It was truly inspiring. Like, you've taken something that you started off with years ago, made it your own through insurance and learning even about the business. And I think people tend to sometimes skip a few tracks and try to get to being an expert when they've missed like steps 1, 2, 3 along your way. But you've been very thoughtful in making that part of your overall career. Thank you for being an inspiration to us and telling us all about your stories. And we really appreciate you.
All right. Thanks for the time.
Awesome. So to all our listeners out there, thank you for tuning in and joining us today. Stay connected with us for another interesting conversation in the next episode. Until then, this is Manoj Jazra for the Accolite Podcast, signing off.